Arab nation to have such raw democracy on its streets. Obviously, it's been governed by what many have criticized to be almost a dictatorial regime, according to human rights organizations, for 30 years. So to make that transition in 2 weeks is already a huge step on its own, Nick.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much. The resolve and the passion of the crowds in Alexandria shows no sign of dying out. Well, as we've seen, neighbouring countries have been drawn into the developing events in Egypt, not least Jordan, where Jordanian power plants are now running on oil and diesel fuel following the suspension of gas supplies from Egypt. An explosion at a gas terminal in the north of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula has been blamed on a gas leak, but not all Jordanians are convinced. Nisreen El-Shamaila reports now from Amman.
Flames roar hundreds of feet into the sky. An Egyptian gas terminal ablaze. This meant an immediate suspension of gas supplies to neighboring Jordan and Israel. The pipeline in flames supplies gas that is used to generate 80% of Jordan's electricity needs. A real predicament for a resource-poor country. Earlier reports that this was an act of sabotage were then countered by Egyptian officials who claimed the explosion was caused by a gas leak. That's not very convincing here.
I wouldn't be surprised that people who are connected to the Egyptian regime, ordered by the Egyptian regime, were behind this explosion in order to shift the attention from Tahrir Square to the explosion that took place in Sinai.
For now, there is no clear evidence either way, but following weeks of protests demanding economic reforms, pressure mounts on the government to bear the brunt of possible price hikes to avoid further unrest. The suspension of Egyptian gas supplies to Jordan is going to cost the country over $4 million per day. It also comes at a time when the Jordanian government is struggling to ease economic hardships by subsidizing some fuel derivatives. Jordan started importing gas from Egypt 8 years ago. The relationship with President Hosni Mubarak's regime is viewed as a strategic asset. And though officials here have kept quiet, it is believed they privately would rather see Mubarak stay than stand down. Nisreen El-Shamaila, Al Jazeera, Amman.
All right, we're going to get an update on the rest of the world's news now. Let's head to Barbara Sarah in London. Barbara, over to you.
Nick, thank you very much. Well, let's start in Tunisia, where in the north of the country, police have killed at least 2 people and injured 17 others as they opened fire on protesters. Witnesses say that around 1,000 people had gathered in front of the main police station in the town of El Kef to demand that the head of police resign. Well, the protesters were fired upon as they pelted the station with stones and firebombs. Tunisia's Interior Ministry arrested the police chief shortly afterwards. The UK Prime Minister has launched an attack on multiculturalism in the country. David Cameron blames the phenomenon of homegrown terrorism on the authorities' quote, hands-off tolerance of groups which he says promote a separatist ideology. Echoing words of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel last year, he said multiculturalism had failed in the UK, and he called for a new kind of liberalism to challenge extremist views. He also argued the UK needed a stronger national identity. His words have angered some Muslim groups and come as the far-right English Defence League was holding a major demonstration in the town of Luton.
Under the doctrine of state multiculturalism, we've encouraged different cultures to live separate lives apart from each other and apart from the mainstream. We've failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. We've even tolerated these segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to our values.
Well, Al Jazeera's Barnaby Phillips was at that demonstration by the far-right group, the English Defence League. It happened in Luton, quite close to London. He sent us this report.
The EDL said this would be its biggest march yet. In the event, only a few thousand, certainly less than 5,000 people have turned up. There's also an enormous police presence here in Luton. As you can see, many shops and businesses are closed. The concern of the police is to keep the EDL away from anti-fascist protesters who are on the edge of the city. Of course, the EDL says it's not a fascist organisation. It says it's merely against radical Islam. But if you listen to the slogans, the language, the behaviour of many people here, it's certainly aggressive towards Islam as a whole.
Well, another demonstration in Belgrade where tens of thousands of Serbs gathered in the center of the town in the biggest anti-government rally seen there for years. The protest was headed by the Serbian Progressive Party, that's a center-right organization formed from the Serbian Radical Party. Protesters are calling for early elections, higher wages and a crackdown on corruption. Sonia Gallego has more.
It was the biggest rally seen in Belgrade for years. Tens of thousands marched towards the parliament building. Their goal, an early election and the removal of a current pro-European government. The crowds were largely for the nationalist right, angry at the suffering caused by a stagnant economy.
I live with great difficulty. I was thrown out of a road construction company. It's a disaster. I can barely survive.
I used to work in industry. I know how it is. People are on the streets, hungry.
In the past, many of these people would have seen themselves as supporters of Slobodan Milosevic, the hardline Serbian leader who died in The Hague in 2006 while fighting charges of genocide. Now his political heirs are looking for a return to power on the back of economic woes.
I know you are bitter. I know you are being tormented by an unworthy government. Serbia does not deserve to be tormented by a government. Let us torment the government instead. Let them see how it is when you worry in the morning, whether you will have a job or not.
The Progressive Party is promising an economic renaissance if it wins any future election. But the Serbian future is likely to be more complex than that. Overshadowed by a tragic past, the goals of strong finances and EU membership may prove as elusive for the opposition as it has been for the current administration. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera.
At least 4 soldiers and a civilian have been killed in a fierce gun battle between Thai and Cambodian troops on the border which divides the two countries. It's the worst fighting in years along that border, which is also home to a disputed temple. Andrew Potter reports.
Cambodian soldiers exchange fire with Thai forces on a section of border which has become a flashpoint between the countries. This battle coming minutes after both sides had agreed to a ceasefire following a clash on Friday which killed 3 Cambodian soldiers and a Thai villager. It's the latest flare-up in a long-running dispute over the area around a 900-year-old temple on Cambodian land. Thai nationalist groups are pressuring their government to take it back. This fighting lasted half an hour, and when the guns fell silent, at least 1 Thai soldier was dead and a dozen from both sides injured. The temple being fought over was damaged, along with several other buildings. Some villagers took what shelter they could, while the Thai government evacuated more than 3,000 people. Cambodia and Thailand have engaged in frequent firefights over the temple, but they've never escalated into all-out war. With both governments accusing each other of aggression, the United States has pleaded with both countries to defuse the standoff. Andrew Potter, Al Jazeera.
Australia continues to feel the effects of one of the largest ever cyclones to hit the country. The giant storm first struck Queensland, but its tail is being felt thousands of kilometres away in the southern state of Victoria. Wild storms lashed the city of Melbourne, bringing destructive winds and flash flooding. More than 175 millimetres of rain fell in just a few hours, also inundating rural areas. Australian opposition leader Tony Abbott has visited the cyclone-hit city of Townsville in Queensland as an aid convoy heads further north.
Life in Queensland is slowly returning to something like normalcy, and I'm pleased to say that the military convoy, which has been heading to Cardwell, has made it through Ingham, which is good news for all those people further north who are dependent upon that convoy for vital supplies.
Australia, they're continuing to struggle with Mother Nature. Well, those are the main news outside of Egypt. Now let's go back to Nick in Doha for our continuing coverage on the latest events in Egypt. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Barbara. Thanks very much indeed for that. Got loads more to come on the programme, all about Egypt and also about the International Cricket Council, which has blamed 3 Pakistani players and sentenced them to jail.
taken stolen goods, and he's now dumping them onto the world without any sort of consideration for consequences.
From people making the news.
If the North will be saved a lot of trouble, I think it is important that they should come together.
To those it affects.
We do accept that there was very bad mistakes made in our banking area.
Behind the headlines.
Most South Koreans are not interested in reunification.
Is the inside story. At this time on Al Jazeera.
Decoding the stories that shape our views.
Those